Oh, there we go. How we doing, guys? Andrew Haggerty here. Gonna go through another tea with Andrew. Got my tea right here, so I'm ready. What I wanted to do today is talk a little bit more about different addendum amendments, even parts of the contract where people are kind of failing in doing a good job of explaining or explaining incorrectly and causing a lot of issues with the contract. And this is one of those things where we have to be professionals. We have to know what's going on. We have to put the correct information in. We have to be paying attention to deadlines. We have to be doing all of that stuff. That is our role. That is our job. That's what we're paid to do. And so we need to make sure we're being very conscious of what we're doing and how and why. So I'm going to jump right in. We're going to go through a couple things in the contract, and then I've got some amendments up where people are making some mistakes, some serious issues, and could seriously affect their buyer. So I want to talk about a little bit on each one. So we're going to go in straight in with the contract here. That's the amendment. That's not going to do it. Hold on one second. There we go. That's the contract. What we're seeing is this is the final agreement between the buyer and the seller. If stuff is wrong in here, it's wrong everywhere. So we've got to make sure we're taking the time to fill it out correctly. And that all comes down to the property. If you're not putting in the correct lot and block, correct subdivision as far as replats and anything like that, of it, you can get in some serious issues and have some serious troubles and sell the wrong property. So you've got to make sure you're doing your due diligence, making sure that legal description is correct and what's being done. I talk about this a lot in paragraph 3, the sales price. A plus B has to equal C. And we're seeing that happen a lot when we're negotiating back and forth. We're changing the sales price, but we're not changing parts A and B there to make sure they add up to the sales price. So you have to make sure if you've gone back, we started at 130, when we went to 120, went to 135, we ended up at 133. Making sure the cash portion of some of the finances equals to 133 is important, or we don't know what we're doing and how and why. The next portion here, making sure if we do have leases that we're worried about or that are going to be an issue, we have to mark them down as the seller, or it's going to be a problem. If we, sorry guys, I taught all morning, so my throat is kind of killing me. I've got to get back into teaching 4 straight hours. If we say there's no fixture leases on the property right now, and then 3 days before closing say, oh, the satellite dish didn't belong to us, the home security system didn't belong to us. Well, those are fixture leases. So you said they didn't apply before, but they apply now. So you've got to make sure what's going on, how you're doing it, and how it's being taken care of. Earnest money deadlines, I'm not going to go into this too much, guys. I've beaten this with a dead horse as far as you have to make sure, especially in this market as a buyer, you get that earnest money and option money to title company within the 3 days, 3 business days, obviously. If it falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday, it goes to the next Monday. But if you don't have it in there and a better deal comes along, they're going to cut you out, and there's nothing you can do about it. You've got to explain to your buyer why, even though you received the option money or the earnest money 2 days ago, it didn't get to the title company in time. So don't be holding other people's money. Get that delivered as soon as possible. Get it done. Get it out of your hands. It's just not something you want to deal with. Title policy and surveys, making sure this is a huge thing that people are seeing. We don't do a good job of delivering the survey on time, and we do a really bad job of making sure the T47 affidavit is included with the survey. And if that's not being done, you owe the title, the seller could be responsible for giving the buyer a brand new survey. So making sure that T47 affidavit along with the survey is done, extremely, extremely important. Objections here. If you're going to have objections, make sure they make sense and they're knowledgeable objections. Any objections that you would have that would be an issue, we've got to make sure of as to why. Not big stuff on this, so it's not going to take too long. This one here, buyer accepts the property as is. Now, guys, the problem is if you're not allowed to put in generic phrases. It says it right there on the contract. You can't, subject to inspections, lender required repairs. You cannot put blank checks in here that the seller has to cash. It has to be a very specific repair that you're asking for. Repair the downstairs bedroom's window, replace whatever, but it has to be very detailed and very specific to repair that you're asking for. If it's something generic, it's not going to cut it and you could get in trouble. Making sure, with paragraph 8, disclose, when in doubt, disclose some more. Just making sure you put that information in. Number 9, this is what the biggest problem we have right now is people are putting out unrealistic closing dates, and that's a problem. Again, if a seller gets a better offer, and you said you're going to close in 30 days, and it's been 35, and you can't still already close, you may be canceled. They may say, you know what, we're going to take another offer. We're done. We're moving on. And you've got to make sure you don't put your buyer in a situation where they bought an inspection, paid for an appraisal, done all these things, and they lose out because you didn't put a realistic closing time. Get with your lenders, get a realistic number in there, and make sure you're following through. Make sure everyone's on the ball. Make sure the buyer's delivering what they need to the lender to make sure they can close on time. But don't just put random dates in there that, oh, well, we tried. Think about that. Again, paragraph 11, never, ever, ever, ever put anything in paragraph 11. If something has to be written in paragraph 11, make sure your broker's involved in that. Make sure that's being done. Paragraph 12, the number there, we're seeing more and more contracts where paragraph 12, 1B is not being used. But if it is being used, make sure it's a realistic number what we're trying to get so that the seller will continue to play ball. Notices. Remember, I don't recommend putting your own address as the notice for your clients, because you are then responsible for making sure it gets to your clients, because this is anything if they're going to cancel, they're going to sue, any of those notices. Paragraph 22 is where I'm seeing a lot of issues, guys. If you don't mark that an addendum is included in this contract, it's not included in this contract, and that's a huge issue. And we talk about this later. We've got contracts all the time where we execute a contract, it's a done deal. I've reviewed the paragraph 22. I've seen the addendums I've got, and someone comes along later and says, hey, I forgot to include this addendum. I'm just going to send it over to you. It's not a part of this contract. It's not. And I, as a seller's agent, does not have to, or the seller does not have to accept it at a later time or date. You're trying to add more things to this contract that aren't there. If you have an addendum that you want, a non-realty item addendum, a huge one right now, and we're going to be going over both of these, addendum concerning right to terminate due to lender's appraisal. You better mark those in those boxes. Third-party financing, seller financing, buyers or sellers temporary residential lease. And this is a conversation where I had with an agent after last week. If you add a temporary residential lease later, you have to add an amendment, because we said in paragraph 10 on possession was going to occur upon closing and funding. We now have to amend this contract to paragraph 10 to say, according to temporary residential lease, and include a residential lease on top of this form. So huge things you have to think about, be aware of, and have that done. You have the attorney's information there. Remember, we don't execute this contract until all parties have signed. This creates huge issues a lot. If it's an in-house deal, everything goes under listing broker firm. There is no other broker involved, which means there's no other broker on this section down here as well. If not, listing broker, seller only is the seller's agent information. Other broker will be the buyer's broker, buyer only is buyer's agent, or if you're acting as a listing agent, sub-agent. Making sure how that's being done. So make sure you fill this out right, guys. It's really frustrating when you receive a contract and it's done completely wrong. It's just like, all right, I got to rewrite this whole page. So make sure you're doing it right. Take the time. Spend a couple minutes, find out their information, put as much in it as possible so they don't have to fill it out later. Making sure that now option fee, earnest money, and contract receipt are all receipted by the title company when they receive those documents. Additional earnest money, if that is done, that will also go to the title company as well. So that's the contract. Just some things to think about, some hiccups, some stumbling blocks that I see a lot when I'm going through contracts or working with agents in those situations. Next, addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in homeowner association. If there's a homeowner association, guys, we've got to be on point. We've got to know what the requirements are, what we're going to do, because we're going to have to tell them within a certain amount of time, we're going to get this information to you. What are the fees going to be, and do we know what the fees are, and who's going to be responsible for paying those fees? I had a $300,000 deal almost bomb because of this form not being filled out, and the day of closing comes along and there's a $500 fee, transfer fee for the homeowner association, and neither buyer or seller were willing to pay it. And the buyer's saying, hey, this is your fee. And the seller's saying, listen, you got to go sign up for everything else. You're signing up for this too. We didn't agree to pay it. We're not paying it. It became a huge fight. It became a fight between both agents, and it doesn't need to be. If we solve this at the very beginning, if it had been included at the very beginning, it wouldn't be a problem. Problem is sometimes it's not on purpose, but it's not included in a contract, so you don't see what should be there. Or we say, hey, they're not asking for anything, so we're gonna take this contract, we execute it, and then magically 3 days later, I get all these addendums that change the contract drastically to no longer make it the best deal. So you've got to be careful about adding stuff later, because if we've got an executed contract, we've got an executed contract. There's no requirement for some of these addendums. Now they need to be there, but within blank days after the effective date of the contract, sellers shall obtain paperwork and deliver information, or the buyer will receive the information themselves, or buyer has already received and approved the information. Or flat out, buyer's not going to require delivery of the information. Material changes. What happens if seller becomes aware of a material change in the subdivision information? Seller shall promptly give notice. Fees and deposits for reserves. Thou shalt pay any and all association fees, deposits, reserves, and any other charges associated with the transfer not to exceed blank. I'll be willing to pay up to $200, but nothing above that. Or is it 500? Is it zero? What number are we going to put in there? So making sure this form is filled out is extremely important to make sure there's no issues later on. This one, it's still fairly new. It just came into effect about 3 years ago. We're still seeing a lot of people not understanding how this form works and how it should be written and filled out. And guys, if you're working with a conventional loan, you need to have this loan in there, or else if it doesn't appraise and you don't have this form, that's not a reason to cancel the contract. So you have 3 options on this: waive, partial waive, or additional right to terminate. Either the buyer waives right to terminate the contract under paragraph 2B of the third-party financing addendum. If the lender reduces the amount of the loan due to opinion of value, the cash portion of the sales price is increased by the amount of the loan. B, partial waiver. This is what's going to be done more often. You just make sure you fill out the correct amount of money. Buyer waives buyer's right to terminate the contract under paragraph 2B of the third-party financing addendum if property approval is not obtained because the opinion of value and the appraisal does not satisfy lender's underwriting requirements, and the opinion of value is blank or more. I have seen people saying, I'll pay up to $10,000 over, and writing $10,000 figure here. The problem is, what this is saying is the value of the property has to be $10,000 or more, and you'll continue on with the deal. Where what it should be, using blank numbers, we're offering $200,000. I'm going to put $190,000 in that number, saying if it appraises for at least $190,000 or more, I will continue on with the sale. That difference is very big. There's a $180,000 difference there in putting a $10,000 number or the $190,000 number. So making sure you understand exactly what it is and how it should be done, extremely important. Additional right to terminate. In addition to buyer's right to terminate under paragraph 2B of the third-party financing form, buyer may terminate the contract within blank days of the effective date if the appraised value according to the appraised is less than blank. And that is normally going to be the sales price there. So what paragraph 3 is kind of modeling what's on the VA and FHA addendum in the third-party financing addendum. So making sure you understand this form is extremely important in continuing on with this deal, because if you put a wrong number there, it could drastically affect your buyer's ability to terminate this deal. Addendum for seller's disclosure of lead-based payment. Guys, the main thing I want you to get on this, people can figure out how to fill this form out, but what I see often happen way too often is the buyer fills out a blank one, sends it to the seller, and the seller fills out first. Thank you. I've been informed by my brother that I got empty calls. So I'll take something here. And it's just a throat thing. I've been talking for 4 straight hours, so I apologize. All right, so the problem is the buyer cannot sign this form prior to the seller because it's a seller's notice. If the seller does not give notice to the buyer cannot receive the notice. So a lot of times the seller will fill out, the buyer's agent will fill out a blank one along with the rest of the contract, send it to the other agent. That doesn't work. It has to be signed by the seller before it can be signed by the buyer. So that's just something to think about. If you're doing one of these transactions, one of these forms making sure is done, and this is a huge thing. Paragraph D1, buyer has received, or B2, I'm sorry, buyer has received the pamphlet Protect Your Family from Lead-Based Paint. Make sure as the buyer's agent, that pamphlet has been given to your client and that is checked, because that's on you to make sure you've given that form to your client to make sure they understand what's going on. But again, and also remember, both agents have to sign this form as well. So but the seller has to sign before the buyer, or else the seller's not giving notice to the buyer. This is a huge thing to think about. It's something that comes up a lot that we see. This is a form I don't see done very often, but it really should be. Buyers walk through an acceptance form concerning the property, especially if the buyer does not want to do an inspection, is not going to do an inspection. So paragraph A, property was inspected by inspector or inspectors with buyer's choice. Buyers refused inspection, or buyers chose not to have the property inspected. Making sure and marking that box for the buyer to fill out just makes it a whole lot easier. And again, a walkthrough. Buyers has a walkthrough there and reviewed the property before closing on what date. Buyer chooses not to do a walkthrough of the property before closing. Notice, brokers have no knowledge of any defects in the property other than what has been disclosed in seller's disclosure notice or other written information the broker may have provided. Brokers have no duty to inspect the property for unknown defects. It is the buyer's responsibility to have inspections completed. Great idea, especially in this current time. Have these forms done. Remember, we're all friends until we're not friends. So just another great opportunity to have done, have it for your client. Non-realty items addendum, guys. This form, making sure you fill this form out as much as possible. It's extremely, extremely important because you want to make sure. This is a non-realty items addendum form. If you're going to have a client fill out, if you're doing a property and the seller's saying, hey, we're going to leave this TV, we're going to leave the fridge, we're going to put it down and put down as much information as possible. If you can get in the refrigerator, stainless steel double door refrigerator in the property at Frigidaire model refrigerator at time of walkthrough or contract, so much the more information you can put, the better. 40-inch Insignia TV or 65-inch Samsung TV, whatever it is, as much information as you can put down is extremely important, because at the end of the day, we've all been there. Seller says, I'm leaving this. Day of closing comes along, it's not there. Unless we have these forms written in there, it's a problem. We've had that happen recently on one of our deals. There was a free-floating basketball court that the seller didn't want. Someone came by and took it after he moved out. Buyer wanted it, thought it was going to be there. We're going through the contract. There's nothing in there in a non-realty item form saying that the requirement is to be there. So we can't force a seller to go buy a new one. We're just going to have an angry buyer, and it's just not worth it. So fill this form out as closely as possible. Have your clients fill it out and make sure we're all on the same page. Other one we got is the amendment. Guys, go through the correct forms. If we're going to make a change to a contract, remember, as soon as that contract is executed, it is sacred. You can't touch it. You can't come back and make any changes, cross anything out. All changes to the contract now have to happen on an amendment. Seller and buyer amend the contract as follows. Sales price, cash, remember, A plus B has to equal C. Addition to any repairs or treatments otherwise required by contract. Seller's suspension shall complete the following repairs and treatments. Be very clear what you're looking for. The problem with this is we have a difference of opinion a lot of times on communication. Fix something might mean one thing to the seller and a whole different thing to the buyer. So what do we want done? How do we want it actually fixed? Do you want it working? Do you want it replaced? What are you looking for? What is the requirement of the steps that we're going to be happy with? If there's termite issues, is a spot treatment okay? Do you want an entire termite treatment of the entire property? What are we looking for to be done? If date of the paragraph 9 is changed to, then the date we're going to change it to. That one's pretty simple. Now in paragraph 12A1B, contract with seller concessions that they're going to give, more or less. Cost of lender required repairs and treatments as itemized in this attached list will be paid as follows: blank by seller and blank by buyer. This, I think, is the best way to handle repairs personally. Let's get them done. There'll be check will be paid at closing to the vendor of choice. Hopefully, the vendor of choice will allow it to be paid at closing. Buyers paid seller an additional option fee of blank for an extension of the unrestricted right to terminate on or before 5 p.m. on the certain date. Option fee will or will not be accredited to the sales price. Now, remember here, guys, you have to give value for an option. You have to give an amount of money. Heard different things. Usually between $3 and $7 is the minimum number there for additional option period. You can't just put $1, and it cannot be zero. It has to be a number. Buyer raised transaction unrestricted right to terminate. Date of the buyer to give written notice to the seller, and buyer cannot obtain buyer approval has set change to blank or any other modifications. Be very careful about paragraph 9, making sure that there's no addendums or anything that can be used to be actual things. Paragraph 9, you're always at the risk of practicing law, so be very careful about that as well. That's kind of what I wanted to go over, guys. I don't want to go too crazy. I want to see if Brian is able to get on with us. I know he was going on doing some things. I don't know if he made it on or not. Maybe he pops in, but just things to think about. Oh, there he is.
So I don't know if my audio is great.
Yeah,
this is a big issue, and I brought this up to Andrew earlier today because I felt this is a common occurrence. One of the things that Andrew mentioned is the conversation of termite treatments, right? What is a termite treatment? We don't know. It could be a full termite treatment. It could be a partial termite treatment. It could be a termite treatment based on the recommendation of the termite inspection. It could be a full treatment, even though the recommendation is a partial treatment. A termite treatment can be interpreted in how many different directions, right? This is the problem. When it is open for interpretation, everybody's going to interpret on their best benefit.
Absolutely.
And this is why you have to be careful, right? If it says seller to leave TV in living room when closing. Okay, what TV? I have 3. You know, what if I buy a new TV? You know, this is the conversation. We actually had a person say, well, yeah, they just asked for a washer and dryer. They didn't ask for my washer and dryer. Well, I guess that can be, and that's the question. It's, guys, Andrew and I went through a lawsuit a while back, and I think we all got a very clean representation of what a lawsuit is. It is 2 lawyers interpreting law. Very rarely do you ever get to see a judge. Very rarely do you ever get to see somebody that's going to define what they feel the law is. It's 2 people trying to fight over what the interpretation of it is. So be as clear and as physically possibly clear as you can in everything you write. And don't go out there and just go willy-nilly on it, because it's going to come back to haunt you. Right?
No,
this is the problem. And this goes to all the conversations. You know, Andrew mentioned. Go ahead.
No, unfortunately, no good deed goes unpunished. You know, you're trying to do it right. You're trying to do something. I assume they meant this. Never assume, never. And that's why. And the problem is, a seller is always going to be less interested in the repair than the buyer. And if the buyer, if we can say, buyer, go get your own estimates, we'll pay your person, then it can hardly come back on me. It was your guy. We paid your person to do the repair. It makes life a whole lot easier in that regard, because it's your person. You should be able to call them back out there to do the job.
Absolutely.
And with that, he agrees with me completely, and go and drop the mic. So see if he comes back on. But guys, more than anything, the devil's in the details, and it truly is. If it's up for interpretation, you're probably interpreting wrong, and that's the scariest thing. That if you don't have the exact information of what you're doing, what you're going for, how you're trying to get it, it can be very dangerous for you to move forward. Make that phone call. You know, if the answer is we want you to fix what's on the inspection report, and the inspection report says this shows signs of wear, what does that mean? Well, we want you to fix it. What does that mean? Do I replace it? Do I paint it? Do I remove it? What are you looking for? I've got to have a clear, true understanding of what you want, so that we don't have an issue later. Because communication is our number 1 problem. You know, my wife and I, the majority of the time we fight is because we as both assume the other person understood what we were talking about when we were in completely different areas of where we were. Understand it, you know, this is what I mean when I say this, or this is what I mean when I say this. You know, the other day my wife told me I'm fine. Well, I've learned in my life, anytime my wife says I'm fine, she's not fine. And I better do something to fix that, because I'm probably the reason she's not fine. And that's the issue that you need to have, is what are we looking for and how? And being a true devil is in the details of these transactions. This is what I'm looking for. I want just what he said. Hey, you said washer and dryer. No, I wanted the washer and dryer that's in the room. I wanted the pretty you know, if I go through the house and you've got a refrigerator that has the built-in iPad and all those things, and I say the refrigerator stays, and I come in later and there's an avocado green refrigerator, I'm not going to be happy. There's going to be a problem. And that's what we need to all be on the same page with. Don't play semantics with me. We both know they wanted that refrigerator. We both know they wanted that washer and dryer. Having those conversations is important. And having a sit down with your client on both ends of the spectrum, either buyer or seller, saying, listen, is there anything in this property that you have to take with you? And so let's get it out now. Let's get it out fast. Every time we've done a fast closing where we're going to get something out later, it's always bid us because that's what the buyer wants. It never fails. Murphy's Law tells us if the seller wants to keep something, the buyer is going to be adamant they want it. It's just the way it works. So just be careful, be conscious, be a professional, take care of your clients, and CYA cover your assets. Guys, I hope that was helpful. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember, tomorrow, Kit and I will be going over, finishing up our contract information on that end, as well as some great tips for real estate agents to make money. Hope you had a good one. Sorry about the raspy voice of 5 straight hours of talking, but with that, I'm out. Appreciate it, guys. Hope you enjoyed it.